Okay, I need help figuring out
can
where
I
we
do?
are. I need help figuring out where I am.
Yeah.
Are we
'cause-
still in the Bible?
Yes.
Are we Old Testament, New Testament, or Apocrypha?
We are. We are in Luke.
Luke?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
that was my next question. Where are we in the New Testament?
Mm-hmm.
And about where are we in Luke?
Well, I know I got ready for chapter 20, so I don't know where you're at.
I'm in the last part. Do you know we have 103 slides?
Oh, lands.
But that's the rest of 19, all of 20, and 21.
Yeah,
And
because
so
we didn't get all the way through 19 last
Yeah,
week, did we?
so
I
I'm-
forgot that. 'Cause
I'm not
somebody took
worried.
too long in chapter 18.
18, somebody just went on and on.
Droned
and
on and on and on.
And so I think that if I remember correctly, we are ready for the triumphal entry. I think I use this, don't I?
I would like for you to enter triumphantly.
I thought we were going to do that tonight. We're going to enter triumphantly. But a good part of that, the rest of that chapter from 28 to 40 talks about that triumphal entry. And it begins with preparation. And after he had said these things, he was going on ahead, ascending to Jerusalem. And it came about that when he approached Bethphage and Bethany, near the mount that is called Olivet, he sent two of the disciples, saying, Go into the village opposite you, which as you enter you will find a colt tied, in which as you enter you will find a colt tied, which no one yet has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. By the way, we saw that he was coming up from Jericho,
Mm-hmm.
and so he was ascending to Jerusalem because that you always go up to Jerusalem because it's higher.
Right.
And it comes over a hill, and then the Mount of Olives is on the other side of the hill. But before you pass that crest, you get to these little villages of Bethphage and Bethany, and so that's where they are. And if anyone asks you, why are you untying it? Thus shall you speak. The Lord has need of it. And those who were sent went away and found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owner said to them, Why are you untying the colt? And they said, The Lord has need of it. And they brought it to Jesus, and they threw their garments on the colt and put Jesus on it. Jesus said, Go there and you will find a colt. If anyone asks what you're doing, say the Lord has need of it. Someone has obviously communicated with the owner of that animal, because he doesn't, somebody comes up and takes your animal. If someone comes up and takes the key to your car and starts driving off, you want to know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Someone comes up and takes your animal, you need to know what they're doing. He didn't ask any questions. He just asked one question, what are you doing? And they told him that was fine with him.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like that upper room that had the Passover. Go in, and there'll be a person carrying this jug and water and show us where the room is. And they showed them where the room was. And so God was doing a lot of communicating with people,
Right.
preparing the way for this. In verses 36 through 40, we have the actual entry. And as he was going, they were spreading their garments in the road. And as he was now approaching near the descent of the Mount of Olives, so they come up over the hill and descend the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the miracles which they had seen, saying, Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And some of the Pharisees and the multitude said to him, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. And he answered and said, I tell you, if these become silent, the stones will cry out. The people were spreading their garments on the road. There was the whole multitude of disciples, all of his followers, a large number of his followers were there. And they were praising God joyfully with a loud voice, partially because of all the miracles that they had witnessed throughout the past 3 years. And they were saying, Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, which is reminiscent of Psalm 118. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. O Lord, do save, we beseech thee. O Lord, we beseech thee, do send prosperity. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. We have blessed you from the house of the Lord. The Lord is God, and he has given us light. Bind the festival sacrifice with cords to the horns of the altar. Thou art my God, and I give thanks to thee. Thou art my God, I extol thee. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his loving kindness is everlasting. And it gives new meaning to that. You tied that into what was happening as Jesus was riding in toward Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. And they said, Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And that sounds familiar too.
It does.
The angels when Jesus was born, in Luke 2:14 says, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among men with whom he is pleased." And so it's basically the same thing as Jesus is getting ready to go into Jerusalem for the last time before his crucifixion. It's something that's similar to what was said when he came into the earth 33 years before. If you can picture this scene, what a wonderful scene that would have been to be there. As Jesus comes riding in, and the people are just praising God and saying all these great things, and he's coming into the city, and these people are over in the corner saying, "Rebuke your disciples." That's a killjoy. Rebuke your disciples. They're praising God and blessing the Messiah, and Jesus just says, if they're quiet, the stones will cry out. You cannot stop this praise. This praise is going to happen one way or another, and if they don't do it, the stones will do it. But it's sad that in the midst of such a glorious occasion that there had to be somebody there, and we know why the Jewish leaders had that kind of attitude, who said you need to make them be quiet and not praise God. In verses 41 through 44, he weeps over Jerusalem. And when he approached, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, "If you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes. For the day shall come upon you when your enemies will throw up a bank before you and surround you and hem you in on every side, and will level you to the ground and your children within you, and they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation." As Jesus looks at Jerusalem as he's approaching it for the last time, he weeps. Another account he talks about he wanted to gather them under his wings like a hen gathered her chicks. That if you had known this day, if you would have just been prepared for this day, but it's been hidden from your eyes. The enemies are going to throw up a bank around you. They're going to surround you. They're going to hem you in on every side, and they're going to level you to the ground. Your children along with you, and they're not going to leave one stone upon another. And it's not hard to recognize this as the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. Right? It's pretty clear that that's what he's talking about, and he's going to come back to this before too long and talk some more about the destruction of Jerusalem. But notice that because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. Now, sometimes God hid things from people to accomplish his purpose, but oftentimes it was hidden by their own blindness. They did not recognize it. It wasn't that it wasn't there, they just didn't see it. And so this is a case of having eyes and you do not see, having ears you don't hear. You didn't recognize the time of your visitation. The visitation would be the Messiah, and you didn't get it. The Messiah came and you did not understand. In 2 Corinthians 4, it tells us that even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, in whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. And sadly, that's often the case, that Satan manages to blind the eyes of people, and they cannot see such a glorious light, the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. In verses 45 through 48, Jesus goes in and cleanses the temple. And he entered the temple and began to cast out those who were selling, saying to them, "It is written, and my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a robber's den." And he was teaching daily in the temple, but the chief priests and the scribes and the leading men among the people were trying to destroy him, and they could not find anything that they might do, for all the people were hanging upon his words. I think this is the second time Jesus do that. If we look in the Gospel of John, it appears that he did it once at the beginning of his ministry and once at the end of his ministry, which would be appropriate. That as he began his ministry, he cleaned house. It didn't take them long to mess it back up. At the end of his ministry, he goes in and cleans house again. He casts out the ones who are making it into a marketplace. It should be a house of prayer. This is a place of worship for God. And they turned it into a robber's den. Not only were they selling merchandise, but they weren't even being honest about it. They had ways to make a profit by what they were doing. Now, Jesus was teaching daily in the temple, and the Jewish leaders were trying to destroy him, but they couldn't find anything that they could do to him, and all the people were hanging upon his words. And this is why they needed a traitor. They needed somebody to betray Jesus. They needed to catch him, hopefully, or preferably at night, when he was away from the city. And, we have to remember that they didn't have street lights and flashlights and all those things. They're going to find somebody at night. They had to know where they were already. And so they needed to find somebody that was in his inner circle who knew exactly where to find it. They just couldn't do that during the daytime out of fear for the people. Which brings us up to
Chapter 20.
chapter 20.
We're going to see a variation on a theme there with what they're trying to do to get rid of him. So, verses 1 through 8, start the chapter off. Came about on one of the days while he was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel that the chief priests and the scribes with the elders confronted him, and they spoke, saying to him, "Tell us by what authority you are doing these things, or who is the one who gave you this authority?" And he answered and said to them, "I shall also ask you a question, and you tell me. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men?" And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why did you not believe him?' But if we say from men, all the people will stone us to death, for they are convinced that John was a prophet." And they answered that they did not know where it came from. And Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." So Jesus was teaching and preaching in the temple, doing what he does in the open. And it's interesting that they were trying to find a way to secretly do what they wanted to do because their deeds were dark and they needed to be hidden by the dark. But Jesus was doing what he did out in the open. He was not ashamed of what he was doing.
In fact, they would ultimately try him at night, which was illegal by their own law.
Right, yeah.
But they needed the cover of darkness.
Yeah. And then he is confronted by the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, which I thought it was interesting that where did the Pharisees go? I think they're in there.
They're somewhere in there.
They're mixed in with all of this, but it's interesting that we see Pharisees over and over, and it just kind of struck me that it seems we have a different designation of people. But I think it's just a show of the idea that all of the established religious leadership came in opposition to Jesus. There was no safe haven for Jesus among the religious leaders of the day. And they ask a simple question, by what authority? And really what they're asking was, or the comment that they're making was, you don't have our permission to be doing this. You're not paying homage to the way that we do things. You're not recognizing our authority because you're speaking against us. And so we are the authority. Why are you speaking against us? Why have you not come to us to seek our approval for the things that you're doing and teaching and performing? So Jesus, as he often does, turns the question back on them. Jesus doesn't play their games. Jesus plays his own game. He has his own agenda.
You would think that after 3 years they would have figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
They're not very sharp.
Right. And so Jesus turns the question back on him, and he says, was John's baptism from heaven or from men? Now, does Jesus know where John's baptism came from?
I think he knows the answer to that question.
I think there's a good rule, especially in cross-examination.
Yeah,
you don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to.
A lawyer never asks the question they don't know the answer to.
So Jesus knows the answer to this question, of course, but this goes back to Mark 1, and it records the baptism of Jesus. It says, John the Baptist appeared in the wilderness preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. And all the country of Judea was going out to him, and all the people of Jerusalem, and they were being baptized by him in the Jordan River, confessing their sins. And John was clothed with camel's hair and wore a leather belt around his waist, and his diet was locusts and wild honey. And he was preaching and saying, after me one is coming who is mightier than I, and I'm not fit to stoop down and untie the thong of his sandals. I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. It came about in those days that Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opening and the Spirit like a dove descending upon him. And a voice came out of the heavens, Thou art my beloved Son, in thee I am well pleased. So Jesus' question is John's baptism from heaven or from men? Well, Jesus participated in it, which means he believes it was authoritative, it was righteous. But it has heaven's literal stamp of approval. The baptism that John performed upon Jesus received the approval of heaven when God's voice boomed from the cloud saying, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased, and when the Spirit of God descended upon Jesus as a dove. So John's baptism, to anybody who was there and witnessed that, there's only one answer to Jesus' question. It is from heaven. And there would have been people in this crowd who were there and witnessed that happen. So when including the religious leaders, because they were going out to see John, there may have been elders and chief priests who were there at that moment and saw that happen. And so when Jesus asked that question, he's not asking a question that they should have to think about, that they should have to ponder on. The answer is obvious. But their answer is calculated. They don't respond in a way that is truthful because they calculate how their response is going to be seen. If we say yes, he's got us trapped. If we say it's from heaven, he's got us trapped because we have not recognized it.
He'll say, why didn't you do it then?
Why didn't you accept it? Why did you reject John? But if we say no, the people who saw what took place, who saw and heard John, who recognized him as a prophet, who have accepted his teaching, accepted his baptism, the people will stone us. And so they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. It demonstrates in one little vignette here how they don't care about the truth. The truth is irrelevant to them. They care about one thing alone, and that is power. And as long as they retain power, the truth is just a casualty of their war on the people. If the truth serves them, they'll use it. If the truth doesn't serve them, they'll discard it. And that's all there is to it. So they refuse to answer Jesus' question appropriately, and because of that, then Jesus refuses to answer their question, because he's not going to get a fair response out of them no matter what he says. If he says, my teaching is from heaven, they're going to oppose him. If he says, my teaching is not from heaven, that would be a lie. He wouldn't say that anyway. But then they would say, then why are you teaching it? So Jesus is not going to get a fair response from them no matter what he says, so he just refuses to play their game.
Yeah, and basically he answers their question with a question. They ask him what authority, and he says, okay, what authority did John have?
Yeah.
And they said, well, we don't know. And he said, well, I'm not going to answer you either.
Right. Yeah.
The same way you answered me is how I'm going to answer you.
Yeah. If you won't recognize John's authority, then you're sure not going to recognize
Yeah.
mine.
And if you won't even answer the question about whose authority did John have,
Yeah.
then why should I answer your question about what authority do I have?
Right. Verses 9 through 18, it says, and he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey for a long time. And at the harvest time, he sent a slave to the vine growers in order that they might give him some of the produce of the vineyard. But the vine growers beat him, sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send another slave, and they beat him also and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he began... one more. There we go. And he proceeded to send a third, and this one also they wounded and cast out. The owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him. But when the vine growers saw him, they reasoned with one another, saying, this is the heir. Let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours. They threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What therefore will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy these vine growers, and will give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, may it never be. He looked at them and said, what then is this that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust. So it's the parable of the vine growers. The owner planted the vineyard, he hired workers, and he went away on a long trip. And then at the time of the harvest, he sent a slave to collect. It's his produce, it's his land, it's his right.
You know,
to collect.
That was the agreement from the beginning.
Right. Yeah. It's not unexpected. It is what should happen. So he sent a slave to collect, but the workers beat the slave, sent him on his way. Repeat that 2 more times. The owner demonstrates extreme patience here. He has every right to demand collection. He has every right to demand that what's due him be given him, and yet he shows patience. He sends another slave. That one is beaten. Sends another slave. That one is beaten. And then he says, well, how am I going to get this across to them? I know. I'll send my beloved son. And he sends his son, again, not as a show of strength, but as a show of compassion. He sends his son as a show of an opportunity to restore a relationship that has been severed. You have harmed me 3 times by injuring my slaves. I'm going to send you my son as a gesture of my goodwill to demonstrate to you the desire I have for a relationship with you. I want to honor our original agreement. And the workers, when they see this, they say, now is our real opportunity. We will kill the son, and then the vineyard becomes ours for real. So when the owner's son is killed, what is the only recourse at that moment?
Their logic astounds me.
Mm-hmm.
They really think that if they kill the son, they will inherit the vineyard?
Right.
They have no power. If they had any power, they would have owned a vineyard.
Right.
They didn't have any money. They had no power.
Right.
Here's a man who's wealthy enough and powerful enough to own property and to hire laborers, and they think they're just going to take it just because they want it.
Yeah. And so the owner reacts very predictably by demanding justice at this point, and he gets justice in the condemnation of those who have betrayed his son. The only question is, why did the owner wait so long? I mean, that's really from a logical standpoint.
Yeah.
He should have demanded justice before that, but because of his compassion, he extended that to where it cost him eventually even his own son. The people's response to the parable is interesting. May it never be. They can't imagine a scenario wherein this would actually take place, and they understand that there's a deeper meaning to this than what is going on. So Jesus uses that response to build on what comes next. Mm-hmm. So verses 19 through 26, the scribes and the chief priests tried to lay hands on him at that very hour, and they feared the people, for they understood that he spoke this parable against them. And they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be righteous in order that they might catch him in some statement, so as to deliver him up to the rule and authority of the governor. And they questioned him, saying, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach correctly, and you are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But he detected their trickery and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose likenesses and description does it have?" And they said, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were unable to catch him in a saying in the presence of the people, and marveling at his answer, they became silent. So the chief priests and scribes conspire against Jesus. They recognize, it's interesting how often they didn't understand what the parables meant, because their ears were deaf and their eyes were blind to the things that Jesus was trying to teach. And yet in this case, they understand, wait a minute, he's talking about us in this parable. We're the bad guys in this one. We recognize ourselves in this parable. And it's interesting that so often they didn't see themselves, but here finally they did. And not only do they see themselves, but they understand that the people see them in it as well. The people understand that Jesus is questioning their authority, questioning their power over the people in the way that they've wielded that power in the past. And so they can't let this stand. So they are ready to take action against Jesus. So they send people who pretend to be religious. I'm glad we don't have to deal with people in this day and age.
That's a good thing. That's a thing of the past.
Yeah, nobody pretends to be religious today. But they pretended to be religious. They asked Jesus questions to try and trap him, and they butter him up. You know, we know that you're a good teacher. We know that you don't play favorites. We know that you do everything right and honest and properly. And you could just hear the sugar coming off of this, and it's just not sincere. But they question Jesus to try to trap him, and they say, "Is it lawful to pay taxes?" Well, here again, they think they've asked a question that is going to entrap Jesus no matter how he answers. If he says no, it's not lawful to pay taxes, they're going to go straight to the Roman magistrate, and they're going to say, this guy is citing insurrection against Caesar. But if he says, yes, it is lawful to pay taxes, then they're going to cite the Jewish zealots of the day who want there to be a rebellion, who want there to be a separate Jewish state. And they're going to say, look, this man that you're holding up to be the Messiah says that we are beholden to Rome. So they believe they've got him entrapped. But Jesus, as he always does, has a way out. Oh, you've got one. Did you get this as an allowance when you were a little boy?
Yeah, I did. No, that's not one. That is the one. That is a
this is the one?
The one. That is a denarius of Tiberius, which would have been the coin that Jesus would have held, a denarius of Tiberius.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That's the one. Yeah. So I thought maybe this is the one that the fish had.
No, I have that one.
You got that one too?
I've got it too.
Okay, no.
It
probably doesn't smell good.
Well, it has little teeth marks in it.
Okay. But
we'll do that another time.
Okay, this is show and tell. We can pass it around.
Yeah.
But he says, he takes the coin. Whose picture is on it? Caesar's picture. If it's Caesar's, give it to him. You know, this is not why I'm here. This is trivial. This is a trivial matter. I'm here to talk about kingdom things. Taxes have nothing to do with kingdom. I'm here to talk about the kingdom. So they were silenced by his answer, as they always are. And, you know, it looks like eventually they would become so amazed by his answers that maybe they'd start to believe who he was. But I think they just don't care who
They
he
don't
is.
care. They don't want to get it.
Yeah.
They don't care who he is.
So,
He's a threat to their authority.
right. They want him out of the way, is exactly right.
Yeah.
Verses 27 to 33, now there came to him some of the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, and they questioned him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, having a wife, and he is childless, his brother should take the wife and raise up offspring to his brother. Now there were 7 brothers, and the first took a wife and died childless, and the second and the third took her, and in the same way all 7 died,
Whoops.
leaving no children. Finally the woman died also. In the resurrection, therefore, which one's wife will she be? For all 7 had her as a wife. So now the Sadducees take their turn. The Pharisees, we've seen them in the last several chapters. Now we've seen the scribes, the chief priests, the others, the elders. Now it's the Sadducees' turn to come and ask questions. And a hallmark of their belief is that they don't believe in angels. They don't believe in resurrection. They don't believe in miracles. They're very what would you say, stoic? They're
very physical.
Yeah, they're just, the physical world and realm is all that we have. That's all there is. So they create an extreme hypothetical. They take the law of Moses that is recognized as the law of the land. They believe, they say, in the law of Moses, and so they create an extreme hypothetical. And they say, if a man dies childless, then his brother is supposed to take his wife and raise up descendants in his brother's name. So we do that with 7 brothers. All 7 brothers have the same wife to raise up children in each successive son's name. And now in the resurrection, whose wife will she be? Because, we can't have 7 brothers have the same wife. That's chaos. That's ridiculous. And so, again, they paint Jesus in a corner, and they think it's going to be a way to entrap him. But Jesus responds, you're thinking in fleshly terms. And in fleshly terms, that might create a problem, but we're talking about spiritual terms. And in the resurrection, there is no marriage. There's no giving. There's no taking of marriage. There is not that type of relationship. That's the next section. Thank you. So I was getting ahead of myself. Well, I haven't read Jesus' response yet. So Jesus said to them, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and to the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. For neither can they die anymore, for they are like angels, and are the sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But that the dead are raised, even Moses showed in the passage about the burning bush, where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he's not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him. And some of the scribes answered and said, Teacher, you have spoken well. But they did not have courage to question him any longer about anything. So Jesus replies to their question about the resurrection. The coming age, there is no marriage. That's your premise is false from the beginning. There's no such thing as marriage in the resurrection. So your question is a moot point. It doesn't matter. But going back to your original argument, when you want to cite the law of Moses and try to make the law of Moses propaganda to spout your false doctrine about no resurrection, Moses taught about the idea of a resurrection when he said that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, by the time Moses came around, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had been dead for many, many years, and yet God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not he was, but he is. And so Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob must still be somewhere. They must still be viable. Otherwise, God is not their God. And so Moses confirmed the fact that there would be a resurrection. And not only that, but Jesus also squeezed in a comment about the angels there, just to give them another shot, because
But they didn't believe in angels either.
The Sadducees didn't believe in angels anyway. So God is not the God of the dead, but he's the God of the living. And then I like the way the scribes, who would have been not Sadducees, they would have been people who did believe in the resurrection. They're like, yeah, way to go, Jesus. He's been hammering them all chapter long, but now he finally says something they agree with, and they're eager to back him up because he scored points against their political rivals. Mm-hmm. So, verses 41 to 44, and he said to them, how is it that they say the Christ is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make thine enemies a footstool for thy feet. David therefore calls him Lord, and how is he his son? So Jesus is not done with them yet. They threw this hypothetical at him to try to entrap him into saying that there is no resurrection. Now Jesus says, wait a minute, let me ask you a question. You know who David is, and David wrote about the coming Messiah, and David declared that he is my Lord, but he also said he is my son. So which is it? Is the Messiah the son of David, or is he the Lord of David? And if he is the son of David, but also the Lord, how does that work? And so how can David refer to him as both? Well, it gets to the eternality of Jesus as being pre-existent to David, and it also brings up the idea that David is not gone and forgotten, that David is not gone never to be raised again, but David is also a viable candidate for resurrection because of the wording of the question. So
In the physical realm, Jesus is of the lineage.
he absolutely is a descendant of David, but how could he be before David, but also after David?
Now, how could it be his Lord, which would put him above David,
Yeah.
and not be born for 1,000 years?
Right. So it turns it back around on them, and again puts puts the ball into their court to have to try to prove their idea that there is no afterlife, that there is no spiritual realm, that there is just the physical realm. Verses 45 to 47 says, while all the people were listening, he said to the disciples, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love respectful greetings in the marketplaces and chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets, who devour widows' houses and for appearance sake offer long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation. So within earshot of the people, he's speaking to the disciples, but he's doing so within earshot of the people. The people are hearing him. So again, he is not done with the religious leaders of the day. Beware of the scribes. The scribes are this group of people that have, on the one hand, been trying to entrap him, on the one hand, been buttering him up and saying, sugary sweet things to him, even though they don't intend it. But then when he says something that they agree with to score political points against the rivals, then they commend him. So they're playing both sides of the fence here, even with Jesus, who they're trying to kill. And Jesus says to the people, beware of them. They're not who they claim to be. They're not who they appear to be. They set themselves up as your leaders. They set themselves up as people who are knowledgeable about the ways of God, and yet they show themselves to be people who are not trustworthy. They like their long robes. They like their respectful greetings, their chief seats, their places of honor. They like the show of the religious thing. They like the show of the spiritual things. But when it comes down to it, they devour widows' houses. They would put their own mother out on the street to score political points against their rivals. And they offer long prayers for appearance sake, but they're speaking to themselves. They're not speaking to God. They're not doing it for spiritual reasons. They're doing it for physical reasons, and they will bring condemnation on themselves for doing so.
Very unfortunate chapter break.
Yes.
They should not have broken the chapter here, because what we are going to see immediately after is connected with, meanwhile, they devour widows' houses. In chapter 21, begins with a widow. Well, and it's a poor widow. Why is she poor? Well, he just said because they go around devouring widows' houses. And he looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. I wonder how they got rich. And he saw a certain poor widow putting in 2 small copper coins. And he said, truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all of them, for they all out of their surplus put into the offering, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had to live on. And so they're rich, and they're putting in all the money that they've made all different ways. And then there's this poor widow, and she put in 2 small copper coins.
Oh, that's tiny.
That's tiny. I mean, that's a little coin. And she put in 2 of those things, and that's all she had. That is all she had to give, and she gave that. She should have made up an excuse, like, this is all I have left. Those guys stole it all from me. I'm not going to give them any more money. Mm-hmm. She didn't see it that way. That was going to God. It wasn't going to those people. They had nothing to do with it. It was between her and God. Mm-hmm. And it didn't make any difference what those others did to her. Her relationship with God was totally independent. And so she gave everything she had to God. Not to those people who had stolen it from her in the first place. She gave everything she had to God. And that's why she gave more than all. Those others were giving out of their surplus. She gave everything she had, and that was everything. A good part of the rest of the chapter 21 discusses the destruction of temple and the destruction of Jerusalem.
I'm really glad you got this chapter.
Did I get it? There's another passage in Luke. Did I get that one too?
I think you did too, yeah.
Oh man, it's really not. It's not that difficult.
No, it's all right.
There are a couple of early church historians. One of them was Eusebius, who wrote about this. Eusebius, they're not sure, but he was born somewhere around 260, and so he was born 90 years after the destruction of Jerusalem. So not that long after the destruction of Jerusalem, and he was one of the earliest church historians. And this is what he said: "But the people of the church in Jerusalem had been commanded by a revelation vouchsafed to approved men there before the war to leave the city and to dwell in a certain town of Pera called Pella. And when those that believed in Christ had come there from Jerusalem, then, as if the royal city of the Jews and the whole land of Judea were entirely destitute of holy men, the judgment of God at length overtook those who had committed such outrages against Christ and his apostles and totally destroyed that generation of impious men." And so that's Eusebius' account of what happened, and that the Christians in Jerusalem had a warning about what was going to happen, and so they left town and went to a place called Pella, and they were spared, and that just left all the bad guys, and they got what they had coming to them. The first thing that Jesus' followers want to know is, when is this going to happen, and how can we tell? What are the signs that it's going to happen? And while some of them were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he said, "As for these things which you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be left one stone upon another, which will not be torn down." And they questioned him, saying, "Teacher, when therefore will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place?" And he said, See to it that you be not misled. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. And when you hear of wars and disturbances, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end does not follow immediately. Very clearly says they're talking about the temple. They're talking about the temple and the beautiful stones, and Jesus said the day is going to come when it will be torn down, and that's what they're discussing. So they just ask when and what will be the sign that this is going to happen. When will the temple be destroyed? Jesus begins to warn them to not be misled. Many will come in my name. Don't be terrified by the rumors that are going around. There'll be a lot of people misleading you, but don't pay any attention. Just coincidentally, Mark has an account of this, and of course there's the account in Matthew. And the ones in Mark and Luke are pretty clearly talking about Jerusalem and the temple. The one in Matthew may go on to talking about the second return of Jesus a little bit later, and the way that you can tell that it might be is the first part says these will be the signs. But then all of a sudden he said when this happens there won't be any signs. Nobody will be able to tell when this comes. He's talking about two different events.
Right.
And so if it's an event that has a sign with it, it's not the second coming of Jesus, because there's no sign of that. And throughout this whole discussion, they're talking about something that they could be warned about. They can look and they can see, they can understand, they could be misled. When Jesus comes back, there's no escaping one taken and one left behind. It's going to be everybody.
Right.
And so in the next verses in 10 through 12, he warns them about terrors and persecution. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be great earthquakes, and in various places plagues and famines. And there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. Jesus says there are going to be wars, and there are going to be earthquakes, which really wasn't all that unusual in that part of the country, but there would be earthquakes as a warning. There'll be plagues and famine and terrors. There'll be great signs from heaven. Some of the ones that some of the historians write are probably a little bit of an exaggeration, that the priests at the temple were getting ready to offer a cow, and she gave birth to a sheep. I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but historically they said these were some of the signs. Before all these things happen, you're going to face persecution. And we would think, oh man, that's terrible. This is awful. We're going to be facing persecution. But Jesus presents it as an opportunity. He said it will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. So make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourselves, for I will give you utterance and wisdom which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death, and you will be hated by all on account of my name. Yet not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance you will gain your lives. And so he says, when this happens, when this persecution comes, it's a chance for you to speak up, to stand up for your Christianity. Don't worry about making up your minds ahead of time what you're going to say. And now some of them are going to deliver you even up to death, and everybody's going to hate you. Which, just today I was doing my New Testament reading in Matthew chapter 10. I thought, well, wow. I love it when a plan comes together. He says, behold, I sent you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. The 12 he's talking about. Therefore be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. But beware of men, for they deliver you up to the courts and scourge you in their synagogues. You shall even be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not become anxious about how or what you will speak, for it shall be given you in that hour what you are to speak. For it is not you who speak, but it is the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. And brother will deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all on account of my name, but it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved. But whenever they persecute you in this city, flee to the next, for truly I say to you, you shall not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. It's amazing how many parallels there are in Jesus' statement to his apostles and what he says here in Luke. Now, he says that you'll be delivered up even to death, but yet not one hair will perish. So how could that be?
Well, he's talking about spiritually.
He's talking about something more important than physical.
Right.
There's no doubt that they will be delivered up even to death, that they will kill you, but ultimately it's not going to have any effect on you
Yeah.
in the long term.
Do not fear the one who kills the body, but fear the one that can destroy the soul to hell.
Right, and so it's not a contradiction. It's a contrast between what can happen physically and what isn't going to happen spiritually for those who stand up for Jesus. And again, he says it's by your endurance that you will gain your lives. And Jesus said to his 12 back there that it's your perseverance that will gain your salvation. Then in verses 20 through 24, he goes specifically to the destruction of Jerusalem, not just the temple, but to Jerusalem. He says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is at hand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the midst of the city depart, and let not those who are in the country enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, in order that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Woe to those who are with child and to those who nurse babes in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land, and wrath to this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword, and will be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Jesus says the time will come when you'll be surrounded by armies. In fact, they were surrounded by the Roman army.
Mm-hmm.
When they saw this coming, they were to flee to the mountains if they were in the city, and if they weren't in the city, they were not to go into the city. And woe to those who are in the city at the time, because it's not going to go well for them. And then in verses 25 through 28, he talks about signs and wonders and so forth. There will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and upon the earth dismay among the nations, in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fainting from fear, in expectation of things which are coming upon the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. We saw so many times in prophetic language what happens when God destroys a system.
Mm-hmm.
The sun, the moon, the stars, they all just cease to exist. They fall, they turn to blood. It's just a common phrase in prophecy to signal the end of a system. And in this case, it's the end of the Jewish system. The old law ended at the cross. And Jesus nailed the old law to the cross, and that's when the new law went into effect. But God allowed that Jewish religious system to continue to allow the people a chance to come to their senses. But the day would come when God would put an end to that. He would put an end to temple worship, and it will be a day of great dismay. And the Son of Man will be coming in a cloud. That's another common figure from prophecy. The Old Testament talks about God coming in a cloud. This is not talking about the second coming of Jesus. It's just talking about Jesus carrying out his plan with power, that he has the power to put an end to that Jewish system once and for all. And he says, when you see this happen, just realize that your redemption is close by, that this will be the end of that Jewish system, and it won't be there anymore to cause you any problems. There'll be other powers, but that one won't be there to cause you powers. Then he backs this up. He really stresses one of the important things about this with a parable about a fig tree. And he told them a parable. Behold, the fig tree and all the trees, as soon as they put forth leaves, you see it and know for yourselves that summer is now near. Even so you, too, when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. The parable of the fig tree is that we need to be able to read the signs. You know, you can look at nature and tell what's going to happen in nature. We need to be able to do the same thing spiritually. And we need to recognize by these things that are going to happen that the kingdom of God is near us. And he says this generation is not going to pass away until all these things happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And that sounds remarkably familiar from Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, where he said, do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass away from the law, until all is accomplished. And the little words but and until are critical in that. Jesus did not say that he did not come to end the law. He said he didn't come to throw it out. He came to fulfill it. And when it's fulfilled, it will cease to exist on its own. It's a natural consequence of being fulfilled. It will no longer be in effect.
Right.
So he did not come to throw it out, to abolish it. Quite the opposite. He came to finish it, to fulfill it. And he uses that same example, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter will pass away from the law, until all is accomplished. And he said something in that previous passage in Luke about his words will stand forever. He says you need to be on the alert because of the things that are going to happen. Be on guard that your hearts may not be weighted down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of life, and that they come on you suddenly like a trap. For it will come upon all those who dwell on the face of the earth. But keep on the alert at all times, praying in order that you may have strength to escape all these things that are about to take place, and to stand before the Son of Man. He just wants the Christians to be on guard, to be ready, to always be watchful. Don't let yourself get caught up in worldly things. Don't be so caught up in day-to-day things that you lose sight of the spiritual things, because it's going to come suddenly and be like a trap, like a thief in the night in other places. And always be ready. Always be alert. Always be praying for strength. And the ultimate goal is to stand before the Son of Man. And we all hope that we can stand before Jesus proudly, not because of what we've done, but because of what he has done, that we can stand up in the presence of Jesus, our Savior. And he says that's your goal, is to be able to stand before the Son of Man. And then verses 37 and 38. Now during the day he was teaching in the temple, but at evening he would go out and spend the night on the mount that is called Olivet. And all the people would get up early in the morning to come to him in the temple to listen to him. Here again, Jesus would go into the temple by day and speak openly, right out in the open by day. And they wouldn't touch him because they were afraid of the people. At night, he would go out, he'd go across the Kidron Valley to the Mount of Olives and spend the night out there, which would not have been an uncommon thing for someone to find a place out in the country to sleep, spend the night. And I just think it's interesting that all the people would get up early to listen to him. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all of us had that same attitude? That no matter when it is, what time of day or night, that all we want to do is hear Jesus.
Right.
And these people got up early in the day to hear what Jesus had to say. Meanwhile, it would take a traitor, as we said, to lead them to him because they couldn't do it in the day. They had to work by night. But the people wanted to see the light that Jesus had to share with them. You can read the questions real quick.
Why didn't the religious leaders answer Jesus' question about John's baptism? Oh,
Greg had a comment.
Just a quick question and thought. You did say that some of them will be put to death. And in 32, he said, this generation will certainly not pass away till these things have happened. And when you talk about the Son of Man, at that time they'll see the Son of Man coming in the cloud of fire and red glory. I don't know, but it did put Stephen to death. And he did see the Son of Man coming in a cloud, standing at the right hand of God. He had that vision of God at that time. Maybe talking about a later time, I don't know.
I think that's a very good point. That Stephen, as he was being martyred, saw Jesus standing there at the right hand of God. And that makes perfect sense. That Jesus told them that some of you are going to die for me, but not one hair of your head is going to be harmed, because he's speaking spiritually. And he's talking about standing before Jesus, which that sure makes sense. That as the martyrs are dying, that they experience what Stephen experienced. There's no reason to think they didn't experience what. And so I think that's a very likely, valid point, that they stood before Jesus as they were dying, just as surely as Stephen did. I think that's a good point.
yeah.
So why didn't they answer his question?
There was no politically safe answer to that question.
They couldn't answer it. There was no way they could answer it. So
How did the scribes try to entrap Jesus? Asking him questions they thought they could,
either take to the Romans or to...
yeah, they thought they could lead him to an answer to one of their questions that would give them a reason to accuse him. What didn't the Sadducees believe in? Angels, resurrection, miraculous.
spirits.
Yep.
They didn't believe it. I don't know what the point is, but I
Yeah.
guess they did.
How can the Messiah be both David's Lord and Son? He's the Son of Man.
He's also David's son. But that statement doesn't make any sense unless David didn't cease to exist
Right.
and that Jesus already existed. Jesus was already existing. Jesus was already his Lord before he was son. And so there's only one way he could be both, but the Sadducees wouldn't buy either one of those.
Yep.
What event is Jesus referring to in chapter 21? The destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem. And what's the message of the parable of the fig tree? Which may be the most important lesson of all.
Recognize the signs. Be ready.
Recognize the signs and be ready. And we may not be looking for signs like that today, but the part about be ready still applies. We need to be ready today, tomorrow, whenever it is. We need to always be ready. And if we don't get anything else from all of these, if we can just learn to be ready when Jesus does come back for the second time, then that's a good thing.
Yes.
You did a good job.
We made it.
We made it.
More than 2 chapters.
We didn't
tonight.
ring the bell for those poor kids are downstairs, and so somebody needs to ring that bell. I'm gonna go ring. You'll go ring it. You know where it is?
I got you.
Okay. Anybody have any questions, comments for Jason? While he's not here, we'll ask questions. A trick question, a Jewish question. Thank you very much. Next week, Lord willing, chapter 22.